One Piece is known for its amazing backstories, and not just for its main characters. Some of its greatest backstories have been for villains, for random side characters, even characters that never show up in the story but only existed hundreds of years ago. And leading up to this final saga, Oda has been keeping the history of certain key characters completely hidden from us, while at the same time placing many hints that set them up to have some of the most powerful and captivating stories out of the entire gigantic roster of characters. It's very likely that Oda has been saving the best for last in many ways. So today I'm going to be breaking down 5 major character backstories that seem like they will be narrative and emotional highlights of this final saga, certain long-awaited histories that may make for some of the most memorable character work to close out the story, and I will also be speculating as to what each of these backstories is shaping up to be about. Before we get into it, make sure to subscribe, and make sure you stop wasting time every day by cooking, when you could just get ready-made meals with Factor, the sponsor for this video. If you live a busy life, juggling work, hobbies, personal needs, and so on, then save yourself some time by streamlining your meals. Cut down on grocery trips and spending hours every week cooking. You don't need that added stress every day. Focus your energies on what matters by just getting delicious, nutritious Factor meals sent straight to your door. Factor guaranteed has food for your individual preferences, with a variety of meal plans: keto, calorie smart, protein plus, vegetarian, and so on. I know that most days of the week I am incredibly overloaded with work, which is why Factor has made my life so much easier by removing the meal planning and preparation from my to-do list every day. I honestly could not go back to having to cook every day. I can't imagine doing that at the end of a long day of work anymore. So head to go.factor75.com/morge60 and use code morge60 to get 60% off your first Factor box. That's go.factor75.com/morge60, code morge60 to get 60% off, link in the description below. So the most obvious choice to start with, and the villain backstory that most readers have been looking forward to, is of course Blackbeard. A Blackbeard backstory seems almost mandatory to truly understanding his character, as out of all of the villains in One Piece, Blackbeard seems to be, by far, the most similar to Luffy in his beliefs and dreams, with the key difference simply lying in the means Blackbeard is willing to go to in order to achieve said dreams. This is something I elaborate on in this Blackbeard analysis that you can click on in the top right corner, but where Blackbeard and Luffy differ is in their approach to freedom and dreams, with Blackbeard believing that backstabbing, cheap victories, shortcuts, and deceit are all valid routes to becoming Pirate King, whereas of course Luffy prefers the more genuine and meaningful route to becoming Pirate King. This is largely because Blackbeard appears to have developed a much darker view of the world, as he expresses to Hannibal, and later even more of his desires seem to spill out as he speaks to Sengoku, as he genuinely seems to want to tear down the Marines and the world government completely, and has some degree of personal hatred for the established order. So that all begs the question, why? Why is it that Blackbeard seems so similar to Luffy in some ways, but has developed to be such a more twisted version of him, who has come to believe that he must achieve his dreams no matter who he must step on or hurt along the way, and who seems to take real pleasure at the thought of tearing down the established world order? Well, from the hints we've gotten, it's likely because the world was unkind to Blackbeard first. Blackbeard starts out as an orphan that needs to be taken in, and it's been established that many orphans grew up in war-torn islands because they were unable to pay the Celestial Gold for protection. Essentially, the world is constantly spawning outcasts that suffer from the world government system. It seems likely that Blackbeard may hold some grudge against the Celestial Dragons as someone who suffered within their world, as he is clearly inspired by Rox D. Xebec, who aimed to fight the Celestial Dragons. Not to mention, we know for a fact that Blackbeard once had 2 sisters, that he strangely never sleeps, and that his body is strange in some sort of way that seems to allow him to be able to eat multiple devil fruits. All of this seemingly setting up some sort of backstory that may have deep loss for Blackbeard that changed him both emotionally and literally physically, and the suffering he endured was very possibly a result of the Celestial Dragon system that has set him on the path to tear them down and create a new era following in the footsteps of Rox. Even just the new images we get of Blackbeard as a child hint strongly at a particularly tragic backstory, as he is depicted crying with the moon in the background. So Blackbeard may have the most emotionally powerful villain backstory in the entire series when all is said and done, though there is one villain whose backstory may actually be more important than Blackbeard's, which I will get to later in this video. Now next up, we have Dragon. Dragon's past is set to be extraordinarily interesting, as at this point we take it for granted, but it should not be taken lightly, that Dragon is the one character in the story with by far the most powerful motivation to change the world. More so than his son Luffy, more so than Shanks, more so than Whitebeard, more so than Roger. While all these figures seem as though they are willing to fight against the world government when and should the time call upon them to do so, they are otherwise generally preoccupied with their own personal goals. Whereas Dragon is the one man in One Piece who has made it his life mission to overthrow the world order and change things. He is the one who, beyond everyone else, has been leading the fight for the Dawn in the modern era, and that is a very powerful motivation, maybe the single most important motivation in the world, which is why his path to developing that motivation is so crucial to understand, especially considering that Dragon's transformation into the ultimate rebel against the world government actually began with him as the son of the greatest world government soldier of all time, Garp, who most certainly would have tried to have forced Dragon to follow the same path. That makes Dragon's shift into a revolutionary all the more fascinating. What was the trigger that led Dragon to stake his life fighting against the same organization that his father represents? Since Dragon really has been playing out a protagonist's journey in the background of the main narrative. You can track him back. 8 years ago, Dragon was an up-and-coming force in the world that was acknowledged at the Reverie. 4 years before that, we saw him and the Revolutionary Army in their infant stages trying to save the people of Goa Kingdom, with Dragon lamenting that he did not yet have the power to change the world. And 10 years before that, we saw the trigger for him forming the Revolutionary Army after the genocide of O'Hara. And yet even then, it seems that the true origin for his motivation goes even further back than O'Hara, as he was already one of the freedom fighters prior to O'Hara. So what was it then? Why did Dragon initially break off from Garp's influence? Why did he become a freedom fighter? What happened to Luffy's mom? What set Dragon on this long path leading him to the current war he is waging on the world? This is something I certainly think we will get to learn in the main story, as it seems to be important to our understanding of the conflict of the world. And Oda has hinted that he really wants to talk about it and will have Luffy's adventures eventually shed some light on Dragon's past as well. Now, beyond Dragon, whose backstory is very important for our plot understanding of One Piece, I think Akainu actually has the potential for the most thematically important backstory in One Piece. Much like Blackbeard, Akainu has a very strong motivation and belief that drives him simply in the opposite direction, to uphold order and maintain the status quo. And much like Blackbeard's motivations seem to come from some sort of animosity towards the world government, Akainu is the opposite in that his motivations seem to stem from a very personal hatred of pirates, believing that all pirates are scum who must die. So why does he believe this? Why such a staunch stance? Well, if we look at the image of Akainu as a child, unlike his fellow admirals, Akainu clearly had a very violent and difficult childhood, seemingly forced to fight for his life from a young age. I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that Akainu suffered deeply at the hands of pirates as a child, perhaps in a town overrun by pirates or regularly attacked by pirates, who knows. The point is that Akainu may potentially make for a fundamentally necessary backstory for One Piece, as so far throughout the majority of the story, we have been getting everything from the pirates' perspectives. Why being a pirate is so great, why freedom is so great, our protagonists are pirates, almost all of the greatest, most beloved characters in One Piece are pirates, but we also need reminders like Hannibal's speech or Sengoku's speech that at the end of the day, the world at large suffers at the hands of pirates. That's such a crucial part of One Piece's messaging that can often fall to the wayside, that things are not black and white. And that's why Akainu is potentially so important, because even the villains' perspectives that we do get, like Doflamingo, like Crocodile, like Blackbeard, so far they all also support piracy and and decry the world government. So what about the other side of the story? What about the story of someone who grew up rightfully hating pirates, who suffered because of the malicious evils of pirates? One Piece is a nuanced story in many ways, and Akainu is the ultimate character that seems set up to speak to that nuance. However, I will acknowledge that out of all of the characters listed in this video, there is the greatest possibility that Akainu's backstory may not make the final cut in One Piece, or may only appear in a reduced fashion if Oda is strapped for time, as again, Akainu's past has excellent thematic potential, but they are by far the least established setups or hints that it's something that we will definitely actually get in the story itself. On the other hand, one of the most promising backstories that has been built up for an absurdly long time that we seem guaranteed to get extremely soon is the story of Kuma. Kuma has been, by far, one of the most prominent, long-running, and confusing mysteries in all of One Piece. Everything we know about what happened to him so far seems contradictory and perplexing, making it one of the most necessary webs to untangle. Kuma's a tyrant, yet supposedly a loving father, and a gentle figure. He was a king, and yet he rebelled against the world government. He was a proud revolutionary, and yet he gave up everything, his body, his mind, his freedom, his dignity, for some greater purpose. He was the terror of the Straw Hats and their greatest savior. I would argue the single most interesting man in One Piece, Bartholomew Kuma. The story set up for him seems to be a particularly heart-wrenching one, as Oda is really building up the sense of tragedy and anger that those who love him feel over what has happened to him. Not to mention, all signs point to him being a great martyr of some sort, having voluntarily made a great sacrifice for some cause more important than himself. I'd say the potential for an extremely emotional backstory here is perhaps the highest of any other remaining backstory in One Piece. And above all others, this is one we absolutely know we will get in the main story, not some SBS, because this is what the current arc itself has been setting up for. And finally, maybe the most surprising pick, but one that I think we are going to get in some shape or form, the backstory of Joy Boy himself. Now, you might be saying it's unlikely we ever actually get to see Joy Boy, and that's possible. But the thing is, if we get a flashback to the Void Century, then we probably would have that flashback centered around Joy Boy as the central character of that conflict. Now, it is entirely possible also that we only learn about the Void Century through, let's say, general exposition, with maybe Robin just reading out what events happened from a poneglyph to us. But usually in One Piece, when a significant backstory has been built up for some time, we do actually tend to get an actual set of chapters or panels devoted to visually showcasing that story play out for us, even if it is just being narrated by someone else, as we saw with Bellemere or Fisher Tiger, etc. And the Void Century is, of course, the backstory to top all backstories. Now, the Void Century is a weird case, as it would feature absolutely no characters from the modern day, but that has happened once before in one of the best backstories in One Piece, with Noland and Kalgara, two characters that exist only in the ancient backstory of Skypiea, yet who set the narrative for the modern day story of Skypiea that plays out centuries later. And of course, the similarities between the Noland-Kalgara backstory and the expected Void Century backstory are huge. A centuries-long conflict begins from the Noland and Kalgara backstory. This centuries-long conflict is about winning back freedom from God. There is a long-running will passed down over the centuries to, quote, relight the fire of Shandia, which has basically the same exact messaging as bringing the dawn, etc., etc. Skypiea is also the arc where all the imagery of the sun god first begins to be invoked, and the arc ends with Luffy representing the sun, bringing back the sun as he defeats the evil god, Enel. Basically, as I've talked about in many videos, the story of Skypiea is a miniature telling of the entire story of One Piece in a nutshell, and the parallels only become stronger as the story goes on. As such, I think we can also expect to get a flashback to what started this long-running conflict between the D-Tribe and the Celestial Dragons. Much in the same way in Skypiea, we actually did get that ancient flashback into what sparked the conflict between the Shandians and the Skypieans, and in that case, Joy Boy would of course be set to play the main role there, with us already getting hints at the tragedy of his storyline, with him being forced to leave behind an apology for failing in some way. So we have potentially 5 of the most exciting backstories in all of One Piece lined up for us in the final saga. Let me know which one you are looking forward to the most in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe, and you can get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics by becoming a member. Just hit the button below.